Hello and welcome to the Addicts Anonymous podcast. I'm your host, Jamar. Today's episode 205, and we're going to be interviewing Jules. How are you doing today, Jules?
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Very good indeed. Thank you for having me.
So you're joining us from vacation on the French Alps.
I am indeed. I had a beautiful day skiing, although it was minus 17 at the top. So it was like
Minus
super chilly.
17?
Yeah.
Wow, that's cold. So let's get started here. Let's dive in like we do on every podcast. We start off by asking you, tell me about your childhood growing up.
Certainly, yeah. My childhood and growing up is fairly unremarkable, to be honest, in the sense I was brought up in a Christian home. Mum and dad around. Family holidays were probably a bit of a highlight. I was one of four though, which meant I didn't get a huge amount of time to spend with my parents, which in hindsight I think that might have caused some challenges. Because that's one of the things I've struggled with in latter years is actually just having that sense of um, yeah, having time with somebody, and especially with my individual parents as well. So I went to a private school, which really frustrated me. I couldn't get my head around the whole idea of private school because you pay your taxes, which means well, certainly in the UK, I should say, in the UK you pay your taxes, and that means you get free schooling. And then my parents were money whatsoever to then send me to school, and I really hated school. So I hate that I was having actually have my pay for me to do something that I absolutely hated. So that was I never quite got my head around why that was a massive issue for me, but it was always a big issue for me. Um, and then went to university. Um, did trained as an accountant, as with one of the big four in the UK. But apart from that, nothing really of that much significance.
Sorry, I muted myself. Going back just a little bit to when you were a child, did you see any signs or any type of activities that you would later on in life go, oh, look, that should have been a sign that I was leading off into bad things?
I think, yeah. I mean, I got visibility of pornography at a very very young age. It was just on a camping trip, fairly innocuous,
So that's
and
your that's your main addiction is pornography.
yes,
Okay.
correct, yeah, yeah. I mean, like probably a number of people that have struggled with addictions, that's that you have like a main addiction, and there's other little ones kind of
Yeah.
that kind of hover around the edges, but that's the one that causes the biggest, or would used to cause certainly the biggest amount of frustrations. And so I was on a camping trip, probably 11 or 12 years old, and somebody had obviously bought a magazine and started showing it to me, and it was almost like a light bulb moment. It was like a whoa, it was almost like a kid in a sweet shop. And I think that almost triggered something at that stage of, oh, I could get pleasure from this. I'm not getting attention from over here, the normal sources of kind of parents, siblings, friends, and so forth. But in this warped way, I could get attention over here by looking at these things. And so that was certainly a trigger point. And then that kind of spiraled and spiraled and spiraled. In the original days of, I'm showing my age here, reach up to your newspaper, slip the magazine in, a store, and then it was DVDs. Internet was probably one of the it's in many senses it's one of the best things that could have happened, but for me, for many years, it was one of the worst things that could happen to access it, wander off down to the store, or I'd have to go and make sure nobody was around. Where literally straight as much content as you wanted.
So how old were you when the internet first happened?
The So I think the internet properly, I would have been 22, 23. So I'm 48 now. So it'd have been, yeah, about 22, and dial up in those days. So you'd press a button and a button turn up, and you press a button again, and for a video to download, it would take forever and a day. And of course, now now it's even worse because one click and you can get pretty much anything you want, and there's no download speeds as well, which is challenging. But yeah, I was probably about 22 when the internet kicked. That made it much more difficult, actually.
Yeah, I mean, with the internet, you can get, especially when it comes to pornography, it's at the touch of a button all day, all night.
And that's pretty much what it was, in the sense that I was working with a firm of accountants at the time. So of course you got given a laptop, you got free access to the internet, and so suddenly I had everything I could ever need right in front of me. But what it wasn't doing was encouraging me to build relationships. And I think actually, just as I'm talking now, because I often find when I share my story, I learn things as I'm talking, was actually I've often struggled with friendships. They feel like hard work some of the time. And I can now see that sometimes, because of course the internet is quite easy. Literally, bang, and you've got, there's no hard work. And when you're finished, you just close it down and it's all good. Whereas more effort, and actually came to a head actually in about 2006. So I'd actually moved firms. I was working for a telecommunications firm, and this will kind of show the insanity of addiction. Was we'd had a couple of people in our team were in the process of being sacked for looking at and in fact I to sack somebody for looking at pornography. And
What do you do for work?
guess what? Sorry.
I said, what do you do for work? You're talking about getting fired. When you say get sacked, that means get fired, right?
So I think the internet might have cut out. I didn't quite hear your
Yeah, the
question.
internet's cutting in and out a little bit. I was saying when you say get sacked, that means get fired, right?
Oh, sorry.
No, I'm just making sure I got
Yes.
it
So
correctly. And yeah, so you were firing people for the same things you were doing.
yes, and I think that's almost that sense of insanity about addiction, is that on one hand we can have one life, and there's almost three lives. I think there was one life which is I was I was a Christian at this point. Now I was married. I think we've had our first child. On the face of it, I was seen as the model citizen. I was, married, probably two children, big former accounting firm, a job that was paying well, good prospects, and yet underneath, I was spending every waking hour looking at stuff that I shouldn't be looking at. And then almost like the third persona was then I was telling people off, but doing exactly the same thing that I was doing, which again just shows that level of insanity. So I was called into my boss's office and asked, "Do you recognise this as a search string?" And I just said, "Oh no," which was, I should have owned up straight away, because he said, these are what these three letters mean. Now, does that help you understand what that means? And suddenly I was like, oh no. Oh, my kind of whole world came crashing in, because for me, certainly at that time, work meant a lot to me. That probably was the main thing. That was probably who I defined myself by. So the thought of being sacked or fired was just horrendous. And so conversations, search history. I then had to go and have a conversation with my boss's boss, who is the CF in the UK, and that was an even more, because it was a female boss, and therefore to explain, this is what I've been looking at. I cannot tell you the level of shame I felt to have to go, yeah, I'm really sorry. I am just so sorry. It was wrong. I won't do it again. I'll go on a course. I'll do whatever it takes. Please, please, please don't take this job away from me, because it was what I had. That was almost what I was clinging on to at the time. So this is probably went over a span of probably 2 to 3 months where they were debating, do we fire or sack him? Do we not? And then I at the time realized I thought I probably was going to get sacked, so therefore or fired. So therefore I had to own up to my wife, who knew nothing about this whatsoever. Timing's not always been one of my strong points. So you can picture the event. So we were at a friend's wedding. We went back to the room we had to go and get something for some reason. I said, "Oh, Bix, I need to tell you something." She said, "Oh, what's that? What's that? What does he want to tell me about?" I went, I think I might be about to get fired." And then and it all came unraveling out. And of course, the timing was horrendous. We were trying to celebrate and what have you. But I think it was just so consuming my every single waking hour. I just had to get it out. So at least I could share it to let her know what was going on. Now, very, very fortunately, after huge amounts of apologies, lots of apology emails, they didn't fire me. And I am so really blessed that the fact they didn't do that. But what it did do is make me start my recovery journey, which, if it's okay with you, I'll just carry on a little bit more and just share my recovery journey, if that's all right.
No, that's what we're looking to hear. I'm looking to hear the whole story. You got plenty of time. You got plenty of time to tell your story. But going back
Perfect.
just a little bit, so your first time ever getting exposed at a campsite, when was the first time you said to yourself that you have an issue? Like, when was the first time that you recognized that, okay, this is a problem
I think it was probably when I was in the boss's office,
in the boss's
because
office?
yeah, because I think, like so many people struggling with addiction, yeah, I'm fine, I can stop. Don't worry, I just won't look again. And I naively just assumed that I could just stop. And I naively assumed when I would have a girlfriend disappear. I assumed when I got married it would disappear, but it would always start creeping back in again. And it was almost like the third part of the relationship. There was myself, there was my wife, and then there was that I would spend a lot of time looking at. And there'll be bouts of heavy usage. Then I'd perhaps have a couple of months away, and I think part of that was why I thought there wasn't a problem. Fine, I can cope for a month, and it's okay. But then of course it would come back, and it would and so yeah. So that very first, when I was in my boss's office, that I thought, do something. I need to do something because it's now impacting my family, it's impacting my career.
Yeah, it's a shame what addiction does to us. It makes us do risky behaviors. I mean, because those are risky behaviors. You're risking your marriage, your girlfriend, whoever it is at the time. You're risking your job.
It is, and if there's, I don't know if there's thing if I could speak to my younger self, it would be something that's causing you to use on a regular basis. And I might be talking about porn, but it could be anything. What I've since realized is actually the substance that we use is almost irrelevant, because it's the underlying or the frustration, the hurt, the lack of love, or the lack of there's something missing that tends to make us self-soothe. And so in reality, for me, it might be porn, but for others, it could be all sorts of different things. And some are seen as easier to relate to. Porn, I personally find quite challenging because it's a difficult one. But then that's because that's, for me, my guess is actually, if you talk to somebody, or food or gambling or social media or whatever it might, I guess we all probably find the one that we struggle with most, the most shameful, if we let ourselves do those things, because you kind of look back and go, what on earth would I do that? Even just from a simplicity of a the countless hours, weekends, days lost due to just looking at stuff that wasn't going to help me in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I mean, so what actually happens mental wise that makes you actually look at this stuff at work? Do you have like an overwhelming sense of arousal, or something happens where you feel the need to look at it? Like, obviously, for like, to give you an example, what I mean, for me, I would get anxiety, and that's what made me want to use my drugs and alcohol. Like, the anxiety would build up, and that would be what the reason I use. What would be the reason that you use?
I think it's probably the biggest thing is probably just that lack of self-worth. So if using kind of AA terminology, halt, hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, or actually I think it's a halt, because actually whether we're super happy or we're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, I think with all of those ones, they can naturally put us in, or me or us, in a naturally kind of concerning state. But for me, it's that sense of, who am I? What's the point? What's the point in life? What's the point in what I'm doing? Why am I here? When I start allowing my mind to kind of go on that spiral of, I'm just useless, I'm just so stupid, nobody likes me, nobody wants me, all it's those kind of things that would tend to put me on what I call the doom loop of, I feel really bad, so I use to make me feel better. But then as soon as I've used, I feel really bad. So what do I do when I feel really bad? Well, I use again. So you kind of go round and round and round and round and kind of go down that doom loop. And something needs to shock us to start going back up the spiral and start going, okay, I'm not going to use, I'm actually going to put things in place. And some of them might be white knuckling for a period of time, whilst in the meantime, so for me, for example, I attended the recovery course at Holy Trinity Brompton, which is a church in the UK that started this thing called the recovery course. And that for me was really, really helpful, because it was that shock of, okay, I'm going to a recovery course. That's for like, ooh, that's for like weird addict type people. And I was like, yeah, that's me. And that in itself, walking through that door on the first night, but I'm normal. Well, I don't need to go to this stuff. Only weird people go to that kind of stuff. And that was a real eye opener walking through that first evening. An eye opener on a number of ways. An eye opener of, what you know, I don't need this. I'm fine. I can cope without. An eye opener of, oh wow, there's some what I would class normal people here, people that I can relate to and I can listen to, but also, and take them the right way, some people who probably had it worse than me. And it's like, oof, man, I'm glad it didn't get as bad as that. Oof, if that's how far it could go, I need to put some blocks in place now so that I don't end up going down that route. So that for me was that first evening was really, really difficult, but really enlightening. And so I believe I was able to get set free from that addiction whilst I was at the recovery course. You know, the recovery course, like often, like the AA and very talks about a higher power. For me at the time, my higher power was Jesus. Uh, but to some degree, there's an element of realizing there's something more than just me was again quite an eye opener, because I think up until that point I'd always been, it's all about me. It's all about Jules. So therefore, as long as Jules is happy and Jules is doing this, then actually life is good. And suddenly I had to realize that actually perhaps when Jules is in full control, driving the car, to use the idea of the steering wheel, it's not always getting us to a great destination. So that was it's based on the 12 steps, and it was actually over 15 weeks. So I went through that course, as is typical. There was homework, and I was like, yeah, whatever. Come on, I'm running out. That's for kids. But it didn't really click for me. And then I went through the course a second time round, and I started doing the homework. I was doing it in London. I was living out in Kent at the time, so I used to use the train journey back home to 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 do some of the work. And the homework really was just about some almost like activation questions to make us realize, okay, so we've got lots of stuff going in here. How do I help it kind of go down to here and really start understanding what what was it about me that was causing me to self-soothe in the first place? So the second time around, I started doing the homework. The second time around, I really that's when I believe I really started making some real significant inroads, and that's where I think I was able to actually put the main addiction, so to speak, completely at bay. Now that doesn't mean that I don't get tempted, because I still get tempted, and that was, this is probably 10-15 years on, I still get tempted. But I've got enough blocks in place now so that when a temptation comes through, and I'll cover that a little bit later on, because I think for me that was the bit that I kind of got. I sensed that I got free from addiction, and that'd be back in probably 2007, 2008. But then a life event happened in 2016, and I ended up going back to the same old habits again, which made me realize, okay, I haven't quite got this sorted. And that life event was that my daughter got diagnosed with autism, and I didn't realize it at the time, but I think that the family I come from, it's almost like we think we're in a perfect place. How could something, I remember my parents, when I told them I was struggling with an addiction, you could see they were like, "Ooh, well, how could that be the case? How could that possibly be the case? You're one of us." And there was that sense of, how could that possibly happen to you? And I think it was almost like the same thing happening, totally different scenario, but with my daughter was, well, that means she's different. And of course, what I've now learned is that actually autism just means they have a different type of brilliance. We all have nuggets of brilliance within us. Autism has a different nugget of brilliance in it, and sometimes it takes different ways to kind of peel back the layers of that brilliance, and it takes time and effort, but the brilliance is still there. But of course, at the time, I wasn't in that space, and I let it spiral, and I ended up using it again. And at the time, I was actually leading recovery courses. I was doing some of the talks, so I had to step back from that for obvious reasons. I just, it wasn't right that I was in a bad place whilst actually recovery courses as well. And so around about probably October in 2016 was what I would say is probably my darkest hour, which is, it was about a 3-month period where every time I'd be driving down the road, I would be thinking, okay, so if I just went like that, I could just end it. How far? And I would be calculating how fast do I need to go? Because I don't want to be maimed or injured. I want to be dead. And I would be driving, and I'd be going, sometimes even with my family in the car, and I'd be thinking, okay, how fast do I need to be doing? 55 or 60? And the kinds of roads. And then the flip side is, when I was skiing, I was thinking, how fast would I have to go off a cliff to be able to end it? And even now, because I'm in a totally different space now, and I'm out in a ski resort at the moment. It's the bit that I think got me is when our head is in that mindset, it's really difficult to shift it, because that's all I could see. I couldn't see almost beyond the end of my nose. All I could see was, my daughter's got autism, my marriage isn't going wonderfully well, my job was doing okay, but I'm back looking at porn again. What is the point of life? Why bother with this? And again, it was probably coming back to that whole sense of my self-loathing. I'm useless. I can't even bring up a daughter that's normal. And the reason I say that is because I now realize that autism is no less normal, because we all have our challenges and our things that we do differently. And so I now realize that autism is just as normal as anyone else. But of course, at the time, I could not get around that, and I couldn't get my head around using again. So I very, very bad place. And then I went out for a drink, where I was up at my parents' house, and I went out for a drink with my wife, and I don't normally talk about things like this to my cost, to be fair. Uh, Separate plug here. If ever you get the opportunity to be transparent and vulnerable with your partner, please do it, because that's one of the things I'm having to learn to do. And it's hard work, having spent probably 46 years not being vulnerable. So I opened up, and of course, she completely lost it and was like, well, what do you mean? You really want to kill yourself? Why do you want to do that? And it was a very, very difficult conversation. She found it understandably very difficult. She asked me to go back and do the recovery course again, but also to reach out to a very good friend of mine who I was doing the recovery course with, actually, a lovely chap called Justin Rees Larkham, who was at the time who's the CEO of the recovery course. And we met for dinner. And I think this is where having the right people in our lives can make a massive difference. So I just met him for dinner, expected nothing of it. And because I didn't want to feel like I was a burden, I already planned I was going to pay for him, because then he doesn't feel like he's having to help me. And again, this shows the kind of warped mentality that I had of just lack of self-worth. So we went to dinner, and he just said one really, really simple thing. He just said, Jules, will you read one Bible verse a day? And at this point, I was somewhere away from church or my higher power at the time, and I was like, come on, what's one verse going to do? Anyway, I started reading one verse, and it started a chain reaction, and it's actually very poignant that I'm in this apartment. The reason I say that is the chain reaction was I as I started reading a bit of the words, spending a bit of time with my higher power, Jesus, it was almost like the kind of the blinkers started coming off my eyes, and I started dreaming about things that perhaps I hadn't dreamt about for years. Because I think it's difficult to dream if we're kind of hemmed in by our addiction, because that stuff gets on top of us. It plays with our mind. It spends too much time focusing on our mind. So I started remembering that ever since probably about the age of 10, I had wanted to have a ski apartment. And so I suddenly started thinking about it. Now, the beauty of a dream is that when you have a dream, you spend your life and your every waking moment thinking about it. So I was like, "Whoa, oh, these are quite expensive. And where would I go? Do I want which mountain? How do I want it? Do I want a busy resort, quiet resort? Oh, I need to get a mortgage. Oh, how many years do a mortgage?" And it was almost like I remember starting to looking at mortgages, and there was the deal was like a 15-year mortgage at the time. I was like, 15 years? That means I've got to live for 15 years. And that was almost like a real turning point for me, because I suddenly realized, okay, I've got to make a decision, because I can't put myself into this dream of having an apartment if I'm not prepared to take it through completion and pay off the mortgage, because I wouldn't want to leave it with huge debts if I was to pass. So that was a real turning point. And the other thing I found that was really helpful about focusing on a dream was that, of course, if I'm researching mortgages, what am I not doing? Well, I'm not looking at stuff on the internet that I shouldn't be looking at. If I'm researching ski resorts, I'm looking at those things as opposed to looking at pornography. And so what I realized is, naturally, my focus became on my feel that dream, rather than doing things that were taking me in a wrong direction. Because of course, every time if I even when the thought of looking at some pornography, I'll be there, well, hold on a minute, no, I don't want to do that. I'm absolutely focused on, I want to have this ski apartment. And then, as with life, one of the things I've found, Jim, is that when we put things out into the universe, and this is something I'm still trying to work on now. Is it the law of attraction? Is it a higher power? Is it Jesus? That something tends to happen when we start speaking things out. Things start happening. So I suddenly started finding bits of information about ski resorts, and that started cropping up. I also noticed, for example, that actually then the other big thing that probably was a real turning point. My uncle passed away, and I thought I'd probably get a couple of £100. but actually he left me quite a few thousands, and that enabled me to put the deposit down. So suddenly it's like, well, I've got no excuse now. I could do this. The reason I say this, and the reason I wanted to talk about it briefly, is because I struggled with having a dream that was materialistic. So as a Christian, I was thinking, ooh, that's, again, old teaching that I'd had when I was growing up, materialism bad. It should all be about sacrifice and that stuff. But actually, what I now see is that dream in and of itself was what I needed to keep me alive, to keep me above ground, effectively. But what it then meant was I could then start going back involved in the recovery course. As I started researching more on the recovery course, we actually started a new charity called Star Recovery, called Steps to Active Recovery, and we created a new life course. And part of that, we said we wanted to split it based on mind, body, and spirit. So I was asked to look at the mind section. And as I started researching the mind, it was almost like, I said right at the beginning when I saw that picture of some pornography, and it was a light bulb moment. Starting to research the mind was probably quite similar. There was absolutely a light bulb moment of, wow, understand why I got to get hold of this thing called my mind. And so I ended up creating the mind course. I then again, it's amazing how dreams then kind of develop and develop and develop. I then actually created the 28-day reset challenge, which is again focused on how do we use our mind to help us recover. Because one of the things I touched on briefly, Jim, was around, how do we stop those relapses? And for me, the biggest thing is what I call kind of the 3-second rule, which I use it to this day. Even today, I've used the 3-second rule. And what is it? Well, it's as simple as, when a thought comes into our mind. Now, for me, that might be a thought of, I was skiing down a track and I see a particularly attractive individual, and I have a choice. I can either go, whoa, and follow it, or I can go, oh, stop that. I know where that's going to lead. I don't want to go that way, so I'm just going to stop it. And so for me, I look at it and go, well, I have literally 3, 2, 1, change. That means I either need to ski off in a different direction, make a cup of coffee, go for a walk, do something that completely changes the environment. As I say, I use this multiple times a day. But simply because temptation isn't in of itself bad, but we all get tempted. So therefore, what do we do with those temptations? And for me, it's the 3-second rule. And for those of you that perhaps have a faith, it's even based on scripture as well. 2 Corinthians 10:5 talks about take captive every thought, and that for me is my go-to verse, because I know that's what's going to keep me in a safe place, by knowing that when those thoughts do come in, and they still come in with much less regularity, but they still come in, but I've got a toolkit in place. The other thing, when we were just talking beforehand, Jim, was around, for example, I'm here by myself for the week, so I have my iPad, but it's locked down. And in fact, so therefore I can't access anything, even if I wanted to, because the addiction voice, as I tend to call it, has this kind of habit of kind of tapping you on the shoulder and going, "Ooh, Jules, why don't you have a look at this?" Or Mr. or Mrs. Google flashes an image up at us that makes us think, "Oh, that sounds interesting." And so I've learned the hard way that I have to have things in place that can really help me to keep those temptations at bay and not let them put me in that doom cycle. Because once I get in that doom loop of, I'm feeling really bad, so I'm going to use, therefore I feel even more bad, so I'm going to use some more. So for me, 3-second rule has been tremendous. And the other ones are really just around having that sense of purpose. And say the moment that the latest one, my latest dream is this 28-day reset challenge, which is just I just love it. It's an opportunity for people to get a little bit closer to recovery, and perhaps for people that perhaps were in that place that I was in right from the start of, I'm not sure I want to go to a recovery course. or an AA type fellowship, because I don't know how that means I have to tell people, and so I think that's why, you know, we have this thing burst in each of us, because I believe we all have a passion and a purpose, and therefore I think this is starting to be burst out from my perspective, trying to help people that perhaps aren't yet at the place of feeling confident to access resources to help them with their addiction that they can do super simply in their own home.
That's great. It's very important, like you said, have mechanisms in place that should you find yourself leaning towards the screwing up, put that mechanism in place and it really helps you focus. I like the 3-second rule. That sounds good. This takes your brain off of that negative thought for those few seconds.
It is very unfortunately. In fact, this make you laugh. So I came up with the 3-second rule about probably, was it 10, 12 years ago? Probably a bit more actually. And then post probably 2018, I started typing in the 3-second rule. Actually, if you're struggling with pornography, don't type that in the internet. There's very weird things. But equally, then I found Mel Robbins' 5-second rule. And I was like, oh, you've stolen my idea, but you've said 5 seconds, not 3 seconds. In essence, if you want more detail behind the equivalent of the 3-second rule, go and read the book called The 5-Second Rule. It's all about the same principles. It's about trying to do something to shock ourselves of stop. If I let this thought fester and manifest, will it lead it to a good place or a bad place? Because we could use them in both ways, you know, in the sense that we often can think about thoughts being negative, but thoughts can also be very positive. We can have thoughts about our dream or our purpose. And actually, for those ones, it's important that we go, hold on, this is a really good thought. Let me make a note of that one. I don't want to forget that. I want to be able to think about it so I can kind of birth that and bring it to life. So yeah, for me, that 3-second rule is critical, along with having that sense of what is it we were created for. And that's one of the things I try to draw out in the 28-day reset challenge, is just that some tools and techniques of how I've managed to find a bit of my purpose, because I just, you know, I know there's 8 billion people on the planet now, because I think we just topped 8 billion, didn't we, a couple of weeks ago. But there's nobody. You've got 2 people on this podcast now. You've got Jim. There's nobody like Jim. Jim is absolutely unique, but equally Jules is absolutely unique. So are you unique, and therefore we each have our story, but we each have our purpose. And therefore, I think almost what I've started making more of my life's work is how can I help people kind of unearth and birth that purpose? Because I think if I can help people find their purpose, we have a choice. Do I use, which takes me down one route, or do I not? My purpose. It's that whole kind of pain versus pleasure. And in reality, we know that using is going to take us down to the pain cycle. But if we've got an exciting dream, no matter how small it could be, and like with mine, it was very materialistic. And no doubt some people on this podcast will be going, you shouldn't have a materialistic dream. And for me, it kept me above ground, so it worked. And I would say, if you've got a dream that you sense in yourself, your spirit, start teasing it out and start looking at, every time I'm thinking, should I use? Will it take me to a good place, or will it not take me to a good place? And that's kind of it's all I guess kind of linked in with the whole 3-second rule piece as well.
How long have you been sober now?
It's about 3 or 4 years now. In terms of the pornography.
Yeah, that's great. It's a long time.
It is. I say, well, I mean, it's probably longer. So it was ever since 2017 I relapsed. Well, 2016 I relapsed, and then it's probably about a year after then that I was able to just completely say, right, that's it. But again, I had to put things in place. I had to get the purpose sorted out. I had to get my mind sorted out. The other thing, with the mind, I think. I was reading the other day, all of us have between 2,000 and 3,500 thoughts every single hour of the day, and every thought ends in an outcome. We either do something or we don't do something, and a lot of the time we naturally do things because of our subconscious. So for example, Jim, do you remember actually doing your teeth this morning? My guess is you probably don't, because you just naturally get up. Similar to if you drive to work, sometimes we've all driven to work on, how did I get here? I know I kind of got in the car, but you just subconsciously do that. Our subconscious is naturally feel bad, use a substance. That's naturally what we do. So we've got to rewire the brain so that the subconscious starts helping us as opposed to hindering us. That's one of the things that I love talking about is, we have a choice with our mind. We can have our mind as our best friend, or it can be our absolute worst enemy. And so many times people will say, well, it's the way I am. That's the reason I drink, or I'm going to wait for God to fix me, or it's because of what happened in the past. And yes, there's lots of things that can cause us to need to self-soothe, but we're the ones that pick up the glass, look at something on the internet, or put stuff in us that we know we shouldn't be putting in us. And there's an element of we've got to start being accountable for our own selves as well. And again, that was a real journey for me. It was actually a part of the journey I learned through my corporate life. So I'm a high performance culture champion, and I teach things like the accountability ladder, which is very much around. People will often say when something, there's two types of people in life. There's the ones that go, oh, everything bad happens to me. It's awful. It's a disaster. Oh, my plane was late or whatever. Or there's the people that tend to be more accountable, and therefore they look at the situations. It's almost like having a completely different set of glasses on. And therefore, for me, I've really had to start taking off those victim glasses of, well, yes, so I didn't like some of the things that happened in my childhood. Nothing particular, but it just that I didn't feel loved. Now I have a choice with that. I can sit there with my big baggage on and go, oh, I don't know my parents. Or I can go, okay, they can't do anything about it because the time has passed. It's, 30 odd years since then. I've got a choice. Do I keep carrying this bag around with me all day long? Or do I go, do you know what? I'm just gonna get rid of it. I'm gonna forgive them because it's not helping me. It's not serving me to get to my purpose, to get to my dream. So that's one of the things it really helped me about just looking at, am I taking control more of my life? And it's again, this is where sometimes without going too much off beat, sometimes the language in recovery talks about giving all of our control over to our higher power. And I struggle with that a little bit because yes, we absolutely need to accept there's something outside of just us. But I'm the one that decides to have a glass of water. I'm the one I made that decision to have that glass of water. I guarantee it is definitely water, but equally it could have been something else, and it could be I could be one that's saying I'm going to use that, drink some alcohol or whatever. But there's an element of I have to start taking control for my life and how I look at things, because every single person, all 8 billion people on this planet have had stuff happen to them. Absolutely. Some is deemed as worse, some is deemed as less, but everyone has had stuff that happens to them. And yet, if you look at the people that are super successful, they've often had the worst things happen to them, but they've used that to power them forwards as opposed to hold them back. And so part of that whole sense of that accountability piece is really starting to say, okay, I've got a choice. I didn't like what happened, but I'm gonna push it aside, and I'm gonna not let that hold me back. I'm gonna make sure, actually. So, for example, I've never felt I had somebody championing my cause, whether it be my parents, whether it be nothing. I never had anyone championing my cause. What do I love about the Reset Challenge? I love when people are writing comments and I can interact with them and going, great job, high five, you're doing brilliantly, you're amazing. I love that. It sounds like you're really unearthing your dream. It sounds like you're brilliant. Go for it. Because I never had that. And so I want to be able to, so I have a choice. I can either go, oh, it's all bad, and I'm going to let myself get down, or I can go, actually, I'm not going to let this hold me down. In fact, could I use what I've had in the past to help me make other people's lives that little bit better. Because my guess is there's a lot of people out there that probably don't feel empowered or loved or cherished or supported. And if I can help them as part of that journey, then that's what I want to do.
And that's an amazing thing. I think it's a great thing that you're doing. So getting towards the end here, let me ask you one last question. What kind of things, well, you kind of mentioned the blocking things. Are there any other tips or tricks you can give to people that are watching and listening that might be able to help them overcome their addiction or stay sober?
Absolutely. Thank you, Jim. So I think, funny enough, when we put the course together, we put this thing together called the Ultimate Relapse Buster, and we tried to split out. We were trying to look at, if you're struggling with alcohol, there's a certain number of things that might help. If you're always going out with work, and they always drink, and people tend to drink to excess, that might mean actually that's not a sensible thing to do. It might mean going out with a different group of friends. It might mean doing something different. It might mean walking a different way home so you're not going past the pub, or it might mean not having things in your cupboard. Because let's face it, especially using that hungry, angry, lonely, tired, if I'm not feeling great and I know there's a bottle of scotch in the fridge, there's a fair probability that I'm going to open the fridge and go for it. Whereas if there isn't anything in the fridge, then actually, no matter how bad I feel, easier to allow the 3 second. For me, pornography, I'm triggered by something. I think, oh, excellent, nobody's around, excellent. But then I know everything is locked down, so I can't actually do anything, can't watch anything, which is a natural help to make that 3 second rule that bit quicker, which is, there's no point anyway, so therefore let's move past it. If it's perhaps drugs you're struggling with, then perhaps you need to lose some phone numbers out of your telephone, or perhaps you need to hang around with some different people. And by the way, I know all of this sounds, to some it sounds straightforward. For others, it will sound really, really difficult. I know it took me 6 months to put a block. In a number of years back, it took me 6 months to put a block on my iPad, and it was the thing that always caused my downfall. And it was my sponsor, another slight plug in it, having somebody, whether it's a sponsor, accountability partner, somebody who is championing your cause or your corner, is really helpful. This individual, for me, it was a chap called Frank, and he would every week he'd go, Jules, he'd be texting me, Jules, have you put the block on your iPad? And I'd be like, Jules, have you put the block on your iPad? And eventually I put the block on, and that was a big turning point for me. So and if it's pornography, then think about whether it's, you need to use this technology. There's things like Covenant Eyes. There's probably a whole load of other ones as well. Things that give visibility of what you're searching for to perhaps a partner, or probably not a partner actually, but to a friend that can question you and go, Jules, I was looking at some of your internet history and I was just wanting to get curious about it. What's going on? Because the other thing I've noticed is a relapse doesn't necessarily happen in the moment. It kind of happen days beforehand, and it might be that we're suddenly noticing things, or we're suddenly feeling like we need a drink more often, or we're suddenly feeling like actually the bookies or the gambling institution, I'm not quite sure, in the UK we call them bookies, I don't know whether that's the same in the States, but that might be, you might be noticing things more frequently, or whatever it might be, or perhaps you're going to the supermarket and starting to fill the trolley of stuff you don't really need to eat. It's trying to almost follow the breadcrumbs, because I often think if you're going to relapse, make it a good relapse. And by that, hear me correctly, what by that I mean, make sure you follow the breadcrumbs back, i.e., okay, so I relapsed, that's bad, but let me think about what it was and trace it back. Okay, it was that conversation. Okay, that conversation happened, then I did this. Okay, so I need to break that causal link. So because relapse does sometimes happen, but make them useful for your recovery by using the breadcrumbs to just get a sense of what it was that caused it in the first place, and try and put a block in place on that. So for me, whatever it is, look at, it's trying to find the things that tend to trigger you, and trying to find as many ways as possible to not do that. For example, I'm not a member of a gym. One of the reasons being is that in a gym there's lots of people in not a huge amount of clothes, and I haven't been to the gym for years actually, but at the time it was because I found I was being triggered continually. I've almost fallen off treadmills numerous times looking at people that I shouldn't really be looking at. And whilst it sounds partly funny, partly sad, I realised that the gym wasn't the right place for me. So we've got a gym in the garage at home. Just do you know what I mean? So it's trying to find what tends to trigger you, and therefore what things could you put in place to try and stop the trigger moving on to the next stage.
That's great. I really appreciate that advice. So, did you have anything else that you want to throw in or add in before we start heading off here?
The only thing perhaps really is just to say that, well, firstly, I hope you found it helpful. If you do want to reach out to me, then do feel free to. I've got a website, www.reset-reimagine.com, and in there you can find all the details to the 28-day reset challenge. It's actually the same website, but just / the reset challenge, all one word, and you'll find a landing page there. And as I said, the reason I put that together is just because I want to help people. It's a very, very small price. I do charge for it, and there's the reason why I do, by the way, just very quickly, is what I found is that where I offered it for free to start with, people actually didn't have that sense of value attached, and therefore there is a minor charge to that one. But obviously reach out if that's the thing that would stop you doing this one. But I just really encourage you to explore that, because I think what it aims to do is to really give you a bit of a roadmap. It's based on a whole heck of research for about 2 or 3 years in the making. It's been for probably, as I say, 2 to 3 years, and it really is there to give you that kind of step-by-step guide, not only to bring your mind in order in terms of helping your mind be your best friend as opposed to your worst enemy, but it also goes through traditional 12-step stuff around forgiveness, around making amends, because that's, we've got to get rid of that stuff if we want to be able to live a life, a purpose-filled life going forwards. But then as a throw in, there's a whole section on relationships and actually how to restore relationships, because one thing I found, Jim, is relationships tend to suffer quite badly when we're in the throes of addiction, and therefore there's a whole section around actually how to go about restoring a relationship, how to find out why perhaps some relationships are working really well, perhaps some are working pretty horrendously, and therefore because having the right people around us, as somebody once, I think it might be Jim Rohn, said, if you want to see what you're going to look like in 5 years time or what your life will look like the 5 people you spend the most time with, and therefore if those 5 people you look at it and go, happy days, I'm really pleased, I'm on to a winner. If you look at your 5 closest people and think, they're all a bit negative, or they're all kind of encouraging me to keep doing what I know isn't helpful, then that's not great. And then there's a last section which is really around high performance habits, how to help you really start leapfrogging on your purpose. So it's around keep getting good control of your mind, going through the more traditional 12-step stuff, getting a sense of purpose. What will you put on this planet for? And then what are the good habits that you can do on a daily basis to really help you and be that kind of step-by-step roadmap to help you get a fast start to recovery.
Well, again, I thank you for that. So, yeah, you've got a lot of good stuff going on. You've had quite the journey, it sounds like.
Yeah, I think with all of us, and I'd encourage anyone listening to this actually, is perhaps look at what you could do with your journey as a positive as opposed to a negative. Like, for example, Jim, you've used your journey and you now create this podcast. I think you said at the beginning this was episode 205, which means you've got 205 people to share their story, and hopefully they've all got little nuggets that really help your listeners. And I absolutely honor you and applaud you for doing this, Jim, because what this says is you've not just gone, life sucks, this is really bad, I'm going to get clear of my addiction and then I'm going to keep quiet. Actually, you've gone, I want to share this. I've sensed a sense of freedom, and I want to share this. I want to help other people. So my challenge to anyone listening to this is, how could you use your journey and your story to help other people? Because my pretty much guarantee would be is, as soon as you start helping other people, A, you'll find your recovery journey becomes that much easier, but B, life just becomes a much more fun place to be, because it's lovely. You know, when people write comments on, oh, Jules, I love that vlog you just done. It was really helpful. The particular thing really helped me. Do you know what? That makes me feel $1,000,000. It makes me feel like I've helped somebody. And my challenge to all of you is, what could you do today to help somebody based on your story, and then start looking further forward? How could you use your story? And I know for some you're going, oh, but I'm in the middle of it. Oh, it's horrendous. I can't see a way out. But what if you started looking at how can I help people in this situation? Because you're uniquely gifted to do that, because you've been in this situation. How could you use that to help others? And then, as somebody once said, who we've been doing the Star Life course with, they said the beauty of working in recovery is we get to have a front row seat to miracles. The first miracle is our own recovery. The second miracle is then watching recovery in others, and knowing we had a little bit of a hand in that. So, Jim, I just want to honor you for starting this podcast. Keep going with this podcast, because I'm pretty sure that you have seen lots of front row seats to miracles as you hear the stories of people being set free from their addiction and starting to live that purpose-filled life because of listening to this. So thank you so much for having me, Jim.
No problem. It's been a pleasure. And yeah, I like listening to people's stories. Like you said, you could pick out little nuggets here and there of everyone's story. And I figured what the podcast is kind of meant to be was like a speaker meeting for everyone, because some people can't make it to meetings. And like you said, a lot of us relate to each other through our stories. And so getting those stories out there and make other people know you're not alone. There's a lot of people fighting what you're fighting, and we can do it together, you know? All right, my
Absolutely.
friend,
Thank you.
sit tight. Did you have anything else you want to add in?
No, as I say, if please feel free to reach out to me, because I just want to, there's things I can do to help you, especially, I mean, as I say, the specific addiction is partly the challenge, but I think it's more what the underlying causes are. But as I say, Jules at reset-reimagine.com is my email address. Feel free to reach out to me on that. As I said, I've also given my email, my website, which is www.reset-reimagine.com, and I'd be honored to help you on your journey.
All right, my friend. Now it's time for our little sales pitch. For everybody watching and listening, if you like what you saw and heard, go below and give us a like. Also, subscribe to see when we upload new videos. You can check us out on Twitter, Reddit, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Tumblr. So pretty much all social media outlets. I also suggest checking out our website, which is www.addicts-anonymous.com. There you'll find plenty of free resources as well as free literature. So that's all we have for today. I truly hope you enjoyed it. And until next time.